Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's launch event for From California, Poems by Dana Gioia and Engravings by Richard Wagener, our 243rd publication. Very impressive. Thank you for joining us here in the club rooms and for joining us online on Zoom. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to host this evening's program, or at least get it started and turn it over to our illustrious creative team for the project. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, the Book Club is a nonprofit member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest and the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to find out more about the book club, to join, or to donate. Now, tonight's program is a rather informal event. It's an in-conversation-like evening with the creative team for the book. I think we are going to have time for some Q&A that will take from here in the club rooms and from you folks out there on Zoom. You can use the chat and the Q&A functions on Zoom if you have some questions or comments. We will try to take them from the Zoom audience and from those here in the club rooms, but we do want to make sure that people who are here can look at the book, can purchase the book. If you've already ordered the book and prepaid or pre-purchased the book, you can pick it up this evening. So we do want to make sure that there's time for that. Now, to get us started, I'd like to introduce Greg Chrysalis. He's a member of the book club's publications committee and the driving force behind bringing this collaboration to life. Greg?
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for everybody showing up, coming tonight. As Kevin mentioned, this is the 243rd publication, and it's a very elegant work from two very accomplished California artists. Reading from the prospectus, they're working in vastly different mediums of expression. These two artists offer a convergence of cultural reflection and creativity, creative vision, illuminating the essence of California. Each poem and image in the book stands on its own, but together they coalesce to form a rich mosaic of what is California. Dana Gioia is a poet and critic. He is the author of 6 collections of poetry, including Interrogations at Noon and 2001, which received the American Book Award, 99 poems, news and selected in 2016, which won the Poets Prize. His critical collections, including Can Poetry Matter in 1992, which was a finalist of the National Book Critics Award. He has written 5 opera libretti and edited 20 literary anthologies. Dana was born in Los Angeles. He's the son of a Sicilian father and a Mexican-American mother. He was the first person in his family to attend college. He attended Stanford as an undergraduate and Harvard as a doctoral student in comparative literature. Before he left Harvard to obtain an MBA at Stanford Business School. For 15 years, he worked in business in New York before quitting in 1992 to become a full-time writer. Dana is the former poet laureate of California. He became the first and only laureate to visit all 58 counties in the state. Reading poetry and reading throughout. Dana's also served as chairman of the National Endowment of the Arts from 2003 to 2009, which was a difficult time to be on that job in a Republican administration who had a lot of people pushing back on the need for the National Endowment of the Arts. Business Week magazine called Dana the man who saved the NEA.
Nice.
For 9 years, Dana was the Judge Whitney Professor of Poetry and Public Culture at the University of Southern California.
And I quit.
And then Richard Wagener, he also grew up in Southern California, spending much time in the remote parts of the desert and in the Sierra. Early art classes introduced him to Maynard Dixon and Edgar Payne. Richard received a bachelor's degree in natural sciences from University of San Diego and a graduate degree in painting from the Art Center College of Design. He has been wood engraving for 40 years. His work has been in numerous fine press editions, most notably with Peter Koch in Berkeley, David Pascal of the now Wacom Press, and here with the Book Club of California. In 2006, Richard established his own imprint, Mixolydian Press. The book Loom, a collaboration with the Wacom Press, received the 2016 Carl Herzog Award for Excellence in Book Design. He also received the Oscar Lewis Award from the Book Club of California for contributions to the book arts. 1999, Richard was elected as a member of the Society of Wood Engravers in England. This organization was started in 1920 by a group of artists, including Lucien Pizarro and Eric Gill. He currently lives and works in Northern California. So welcome, gentlemen. Welcome, audience.
People standing, there's some seats back here. If you
Yeah.
come around the
I'm
corner.
sorry, see you back there. So I look at this publication as a marriage between two strong artistic lineages of the Book Club of California. Book Club of California's long tradition of publishing. The first are the works of notable California poets, which include George Sterling, Ina Colbreth, Robinson Jeffers, and William Everson. And secondly, the artistic wood engraving tradition, which includes books about Eric Gill, Paul Landacre, John DePaul, the two notable books by Richard Wagener, and the recently published important and beautiful books on Joe Mora and Mallet Dean. And the abundance of their publications were illustrated with wood engravings. However, this is the first book that both artistic traditions share equally in one book, and I'm very excited about it. Dana, what was the origin story for this publication?
Ray came, and to my surprise, asked me if I would be interested in putting together a collection of the poems that I've written about California for the Book Club of California. It's really an offer you can't refuse. And he says, well, who would you like to have as an artist? And I said, well, there's really only two choices. One of them is Paul Landacre, but he's been dead for 40 years. I said, it's got to be Richard Wagener. So I said, let's ask him. Because I had seen Richard's work for years, and I just loved it immediately. Although I had one reservation, which when Richard agreed to do it, I said, you know, there's a lot of urban images here too, you know, because I'm from LA. And he looked at me and said, I was raised in LA. And then he produced these just incredible images I have never seen. Is that what, am I telling the truth? About the origin story?
Well, it kind of goes back when we first met. I was down in Los Angeles in Pasadena to give a talk at the Zamorano Club. And Greg called me up and said, we're meeting for drinks ahead of time at a hotel nearby,
The Weston.
the Weston Hotel. So I think we had martinis or whatever. And that's when we first met. Sometime during the evening, you gave me your telephone number and email address and said, you know, when you're back up north, let's get together. And sometime after that, we did. And one of the things you told me was that your brother Ted was a jazz critic. So fast forward a couple of years, David Pasco and I were putting together a book of these jazz portraits by an engraver from Missoula, Montana, Jim Todd. And we thought, who could write a text for us? And I thought of your brother. And so I contacted him and he agreed to write an essay for us. And then David and I were talking and David said, wouldn't it be great to have both brothers in the same book? And so I contacted you and went up to your place and showed you some of the images and talked about what we were doing with it. And I asked you for a poem. And it was kind of, I'll think about it, which is understandable. So you took that, but at the same time, I brought with me some engravings that I had done of trees that I saw up in the Donner Pass area. And said, you know, on a separate note, there might be something that we could do with this. And I left them with you. 7 years later, Greg calls me up and said, we're gonna do a book of Dana's poems for the book club. I'd
California.
like you to do some engravings. So Greg and I came up to your place. And we went out into your library. And I looked around and there was one of the engravings up on a shelf there. And I thought, you know, I think we have something here. And so that's kind of where it started.
Well, so we did this fantastic book together called Trading Eights, but it had one problem. It was full of wonderful images, but none of them were by Richard. And so, you know, this was, so you know, you were the producer of this book, but it was, you know, this was a project waiting to happen. And for me, it was very meaningful because one of my favorite books is the Book Club of California 1928 edition of Robinson Jeffers with a frontispiece by Ansel Adams. And that always struck me as like one of the finest limited edition books I'd ever seen. And it was, to me, it's a great honor to appear with the Book Club of California in this tradition of having not done many poets, but really exquisite editions when they do it.
So I need to add, footnote is we were at the Westin when you and I were talking about a group of California poetries having a beer late one night, most likely after a Zambrano meeting. It's the book center of the book bar center of LA now, I guess. So Richard, you to plug a little bit here, you've been a favorite of the Book Club of California for many years. And you've had two published books by the Book Club of California, California Relief and Sierra Nevada Suite. These two books are exceptionally beautiful and of exceptional merit. And you're a very busy man. You always have 2 or 3 projects going on. What was it about Dana's poetry that inspired you to join this project?
I think there is a shared experience that I felt. I don't know that I would have articulated that way at the beginning, but there's that feeling. We both grew up in the metropolitan Los Angeles area. Dana in Hawthorne, I was in Burbank. But there is this common experience of growing up in Southern California that we shared. And so I think that was what really kind of made me want to do this, amongst other things. And, you know, we had those challenges of competing book projects going on. That this was what, a 3-year project?
Yes.
Sometimes you hope they would be a 1-year project, but it took 3 years, and part of it was because of competing projects that commitments have been made. I would like to just acknowledge my two books with the book club that you mentioned, I did that in collaboration with Peter Koch.
Yes, yeah, Peter's right here. And then, on your classic all-time book is the Zebra Noise,
Zebra Noise,
which you did with Peter Koch. That's
Peter is the guilty one because he got me into the book world. People had
Thank you,
talked,
Peter.
people had talked about wood engraving. They saw, oh, there's this rich history of wood engraving in fine press books. And this one person told me, in a couple of weeks, there's going to be the Antiquarian Book Fair in Los Angeles. You ought to go because you'll relate to a lot of it. And I went there and met this fellow, met Ward Ritchie and everything. But when I looked around, I didn't see anything like what I was doing. And it wasn't until I was giving a class up here and Peter came and saw my work, and Peter had an idea of how we could put this into a book and do something. So
That's great. So
he's the guilty one of.
Dana, of the engravings from California, is there one that reaches out particularly to you?
Well, I mean, without any false flattery, I love them all. And what I think I like about them is how broadly they view the state. I mean, there's one basically of the Pentagis, Pentagis Theater sign. There's one of a 1950 Packard, the very urban images of a Southern California palm tree. And then next to it are, basically scenes from the Sierras and from Yosemite. And they're all part of my personal California. And that was what made, I think, the collaboration, however slow, absolutely natural, because, we have this double experience of California, urban and natural landscape. And this, will sound, very chauvinistic in the original sense of chauvinistic, of a certain kind of patriotism. I think if you're from California, you see nature differently. I think you see people differently. I think you see the world differently. And it was absolutely important to me to have somebody who shared that kind of complicated worldview, which people back east, I think, still don't fully understand. We're slightly foreign to them. But I think of California as not simply the Western edge of America. This is the vanguard by which America is coming into the future, coming into a different version of the global culture that isn't focused on the old world, but on the whole world. And so I just think it's a very different point of view, and that, at least in some large part, I think, is what the Book Club of California has become to be about. Originally, it was more of a printing venture, but it's become a kind of vision and memory of the experience of California. And I think our book sort of fits into that. And so all kinds of weird stuff happens in California that you wouldn't think of fitting together if you were in Boston, but I was in a town that had Buddhist temples and had the Beach Boys and had, Latin mass, had, Japanese, neighborhood next to a Spanish neighborhood, next to a Korean neighborhood. And that just seems to be the way the world is.
The aeronautics industry right next to corn farms.
Yeah, I mean, Hawthorne made, missiles, airplanes, and Barbie dolls.
So the poems, how long did it take? How long have these taken to write? Did you start them all
So
recently?
Richard's complaining it took 3 years. Richard took me 45 years to write these poems. So I mean, it's, what it is, I went across my whole career as a poet and took the poems that are about California or sort of originate in California experience.
What was the first one?
The earliest poem in the book is actually one of my most famous poems, which is called California Hills in August. I was living in New York. My father simply dropped unconscious in the kitchen and was taken to Stanford Hospital. And he had a brain tumor. So I flew out from New York, and everybody predicted my father was going to die. And next day after the surgery, he was sitting up in bed with a turban on his head, sneaking cigarettes. And I was just very relieved. And I took a walk in the hills behind Stanford. And I remember, and I was thinking of this conversation that this guy I worked with, I'd overheard it saying, "Oh, California is so ugly in the summer. It's all dry and it's burned. Oh, it's not pretty like Vermont." And suddenly this poem came to me, and I wrote it and I sent it to the New Yorker. The New Yorker printed it, and then it got translated into every language that's from a dry country. And so then, in the last poem, in the most recent poem in the book, is the last poem in the book, which is listed called, which is a poem about Los Angeles, called "Song to Our Lady, Queen of the Angels." I'll read the first poem. It's called "California Hills in August." It's all in one sentence, but the editors of the New Yorker judiciously placed a period at the end of each stanza. So it gives it a visual elegance it doesn't have, but it's the way somebody back east would look at the state. And then at the very end, how a native would look at it. California, so I can put my reading glasses on. Got it. California hills in August. I can imagine someone who found these fields unbearable, who climbed the hillside in the heat, cursing the dust, cracking the brittle weeds underfoot, wishing a few more trees for shade. An Easterner especially, who would scorn the meagerness of summer, the dry, twisted shapes of black elm, scrub oak, and chaparral, a landscape August had already drained of green. One who would hurry over the clinging thistle, foxtail, golden poppy, knowing that everything was just a weed, unable to conceive that these trees and sparse brown bushes were alive, and hate the bright stillness of the noon, without wind, without motion, the only other living thing, a hawk, hungry for prey, suspended in the blinding sunlit blue. And yet, how gentle it seems to someone raised in the landscape short of rain, the skyline of a hill broken by no more trees than one can count, the grass, the empty sky, the wish for water. I started. And, and I think that, so I don't know if that was part of the inspiration for the covers, but that's so the golden poppies are there.
Since we're talking about the cover, I was surprised on how that image, poppies, was chosen, because somebody asked me, "Well, what you put on it?" I said, "Poppies, that's California." And it's just remarkable work. So I want to move into the design aspects of this book. Richard ended up doing the whole design on his own, which is a great joy for us. Can you talk a little bit more
I'll
about?
hold it for you, like a demonstration.
Can you talk about a little bit about the design processes and your objectives?
Well, the objective was to have a book that embodied all the different parts of it, the poems, the engravings, and that aura of California. And for the cover, I had an idea of what to do, and I thought, there's something that I could create. We'll make some cover papers. But in reality, I was thinking about this one person who I really admire, who does this fantastic letterpress work. And that's Rebecca Shamley, Pie in the Sky Press, down in Simi Valley. And I thought, I can't better that. So I called her up and got her to agree to do the cover for us.
Did you discuss with her directly about what imagery to put on it, or she came up with that on her own?
There was a discussion, I don't remember how much, but she has done books about the chaparral, California, and a lot of nature. So it was, I think, very much the shared concept of what it should be.
The palette of the cover, I think, is particularly beautiful. You know, it's just, it's beautifully understated.
And just the colors, the color of the paper, the spine is a green leather. This is for the deluxe edition.
The green is used inside too. All the titles are in green.
So Richard, were a lot of, any choices during the 3 years of this work? There were a lot of changes in the environment. I mean, we had trouble finding the paper, and we talked a little bit about paper selection and the printing of it.
I mean, the nicest paper to use for printing wood engravings and has been used over the world by all kinds of wonderful engravers is a Zircon paper from a mill in Germany, which is the paper we use for the Sierra Nevada suite and Californian relief. Unfortunately, with the heavy floods in Germany, but 4 years ago, whatever it was, the mill was flooded to the point where the owner closed it down and ceased production. When word got out, all the available stock around the world was gobbled up by all these people who love to use the paper. And we were very fortunate in that Peter Koch had a stash of paper.
Yeah.
And we were able to get that paper from Peter to use. So that was a big obstacle in just getting the paper that would work well.
I'm just setting Richard up for another question here, which is that when we talked about the prints, he said, well, he was going to do many of them as fold outs. And I said, well, I didn't quite get that. I mean, I was, how you would, fold a print, but I wanted to show them. Maybe you could talk about why you did this.
Oh, I see. Wow.
Another one. Did you want to what towards the end here? I didn't mark them. You're supposed to be covering me up, Richard, by saying witty. Here's
Oh, there.
but it's a wonderful effect.
Well, when I started working on the Sierra Nevada suite, I wanted to do some more horizontal things. Peter had mentioned the idea of panoramas. And I remember one time I called Peter up and mentioned that I was thinking about doing some things, but I didn't know how it was going to affect his design of the book. And Peter's response was, do what you want to do, we'll design around it. And so in doing these horizontal, in some cases, we had an image of 2 blocks. There might have been two, I think 2 of them in that book, which spanned the page. And the real solution was to have a fold out. So when you fold it out, you give a lot of air for the image to breathe, rather than having it so close to the margin. And so it's just,
It gives a wonderful effect, to have a page there and then to reveal the print. And so, I mean, my earliest experience with centerfolds was very different.
I think at this point, just real quick, I'd like to thank a couple of contributors to that book. Norman Clayton of Classic Letterpress in Ojai. He did the printing. He's printed a number of books for Book Club of California.
And I mean, I think that as a poet, the typography for this book is so really beautiful, but laid out absolutely ideally to read poetry either on the page or aloud. I mean, I think Norman just did a superb job.
You've used Norman, right? The Book Club uses Norman. You've used Norman for some projects, and I know Dana, you've had him do a number of projects
so,
for you too.
yeah, Nora was printing the design. One other thing I just mentioned, the design is the cloth that was chosen for the slipcase, and it's also on the spine of the regular book, is this shimmering iridescent thing, which in line with what Dave was talking about, California, you look at this one way and it's brown, you look at another way, it's green. Very much the two major seasons of California. So interestingly, Online Bindery, who did the binding for the regular, called up the supplier of this cloth and bought up everything. So when the binder for the deluxe edition called them up, none was available. And there's no word on when it's going to be available, if it ever. So, but anyway, I think it's a beautiful cloth.
And then just reiterating, Rebecca Chomley, she did the paper for the book cover, the cover paper. And one last person is Nina Schneider. She's with the William Andrews Clark Library down in LA, who wrote the biography of Richard at the end. Yeah, about Richard's work.
Yeah. See, I had written a preface that I thought was a way of positioning the book. And I think Richard wanted me to leave it out first because it was just adding pages and things like this. But then we got a much more elegant solution, which was to have bookends, as it were. This thing, I'm going to read the very first paragraph of my preface because it'll give you an idea about the argument I'm making. So we have the poems with bookends of prose with a kind of accompaniment of prints. And so the book is, and the design is beautifully illustrated, but this is the preface. This is just the first paragraph. I was born in a convergence of languages in an American city with a Spanish name. Although English was the official language, Los Angeles was already one of the largest Spanish-speaking cities in the world. My mother was of Mexican descent, but she had married a Sicilian. We spoke English at home, but next door we used an Italian dialect with my father's family. Spanish was spoken in the homes of my childhood friends. At school we spoke English, though we attended daily mass in Latin. This polyglot world was working class California in my childhood, mundane and magical in equal parts. And I go on from there.
I think ready. Did you want to read another poem, or do you want to start taking questions?
Richard had asked me if I would recite this poem. I think I know it by heart. It's about growing up in LA in the 60s, and it has only one footnote you need to know. Although the beach There's only one footnote you need to know, although the Beach Boys are very respectable now. When I was in high school, they were a love that dare not speak its name. I mean, no intellectual could have admitted to liking the Beach Boys. And this is a poem of adolescent angst, seen from the vantage point of adulthood, cruising with the Beach Boys. So strange to hear that song again tonight, traveling in business in a rented car, miles from anywhere I've been before. And now a tune I haven't heard in years, probably not since it last left the charts back in LA in 1969. I can't believe I know the words by heart and can't think of a girl to blame them on. Every lovesick summer has its song, and this one I pretended to despise. But if I were alone when it came on, I turned it up full blast to sing along. A primal scream in croaky baritone, the notes all flat, the lyrics mostly slurred. No wonder I spent so much time alone, making the rounds in Dad's old Thunderbird. Some nights I drove down to the beach to park and walk along the railings of the pier. The water down below was cold, the dark, the waves interminable against the shore. The darkness and the mist, the midnight sea, the flickering lights reflected from the city. A perfect setting for a boy like me, the Cecil B. DeMille of my self-pity. I thought by now I'd left those nights behind, lost like the girls that I could never get, gone with the years, junked with the old T-bird. But one old song, a stretch of empty road, can open up a door and let them fall, tumbling like boxes from a dusty shelf, tightening my throat for no reason at all, bringing on tears shed only for myself.
I have to hear about the poem. It speaks both to Sharon and myself growing up in LA in those times. But Sharon remembers going out on a date with your brother and your father's black T-bird. And
Some things probably should not be exculpated.
and I drove around the town or cruised the valley with my mom's T-bird.
I'll give you one funny footnote, is that this poem has been translated into other languages, which the Dana speakers of have really no sense of what it's about. So when it was translated into Italian, cruising with the Beach Boys became un viaggio con i Beach Boys, a boat trip with the Beach Boys. And I explained to the translator when I saw this that, that I explained what cruising was, and he goes, non exista in Italia. So we very much called it if you ever go to Italian Square where people walk around all night, so we gave it in giro con i Beach Boys. I said it has to be something a pointless motion full of adolescent sexual heat.
All right, do we have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
What's the song? Was it a song or was it the whole repertoire?
You are
I
the
think it's so many.
2000th person who asked me that question. And because people want to know, but I left the title of the song out so you could put your song in it. So it was a very deliberate omission, which I won't violate. So what song was it? Tell me.
I think of those nights of circling on the dance floor when let's spend the night together was banned. Only cars and certainly were allowed.
When I was in high school, I was happy if girls spent an hour together with me. But anyway, I left it out because I want people to project their own song, their own experience into it. But thank you for asking.
Next question. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question for both of you. You mentioned topography and was that what the word was? The typeset and how it made a difference for you and that it was a beautiful addition to the book. And I'm wondering, what is it about it that you like so much? And Richard, how did you choose it? What was it about the font that made you choose it for this particular font?
What's the font?
How was the name?
The typeface used, this one, was designed by Herman Zaff. And he designed this typeface, Aldous. And I think it was in 2005, he himself oversaw and directed reconceiving the typeface as a digital font, because we were going to be printing from polymer plates. And rather than use something that was reconceived by someone other than the designer, or better or worse, this was the designer himself making those decisions. And so that, and he's such a fine type designer, you couldn't go wrong.
My reaction is subjective, but it's based in a way that, there's two poles for typography: points or curves, hardness or softness. And it seemed to me that this has a beautiful balance of those. And so it's a strong type. It's got a tenderness to it. So that's a very subjective definition, but that's how I felt. But I just loved it. I haven't always been charmed by the typographic representation of my work, because, it goes through somebody else's imagination. But in this one, it was, what I would have done had I only had the skill, which I do not.
Peter?
I could weigh in just a little bit, knowing a little more about the root. The roots of all this by Zapp were from the Renaissance, probably from the Aldine Press and the late 1400s and early 1500s. And the designers who were the punch cutters who were cutting the punches for the original Aldine type were following calligraphic models that were used in the manuscripts from the Carolingian period, Middle Ages. And so there's a rich reading history behind all this font that's almost archetypal for those of us who follow the more Renaissance model. And it was and the original impetus for that kind of is the pen and brush and not steel. And it was later, and that we got more typefaces that were more steely, and this was much more by hand.
Well, I have to actually point out something about Peter tonight, is that he has come to the celebration appropriately wearing a green coat. Celebrate a book that's in greens and earth tones.
Next question?
I just have a question about the golden poppies, because when I think California poppies, I usually think of them as bright orange. And so I wonder whether the person that did that design was aware of that line in Dana's poem about the golden poppies.
We have a question about the coloration of the poppies, which Roseanne Sullivan identifies with a gold, and Richard will now respond.
The poppies that grow at our house and around our neighborhood are both.
Oh,
You can see both.
so there wasn't any association. She didn't know about Dana's poems saying golden poppies.
No,
I was going to give the same answers, that they're sort of yellow and gold, but I like the choice that we made in the book in a lot of ways to capture the austerity of California beauty. So I think it was the right palette for the book.
It's beautiful.
Sir?
So a book like this, so many wonderful components, and you had to work so hard to get the right paper and that fabulous cover, iridescent cover, and the typeset just so I gotta believe there were some compromises and give ups, something you wanted, you didn't get. What were those?
Well, we had to worry about page count. There probably were a couple of poems that I, would have put in if not, but, and we had to, Richard had to figure out where the placement of the prints were. And so, I felt that, as long as I had the core of my text, that the real objective was to make the most beautiful, collaborative book possible. And so, so we had a lot of spent a lot of time sort of figuring out where the prints would fall and what poems they would go next to and things like that. And, I cut one poem just to allow the placement. But I think give and take is just the way all collaborations work. And we kept encouraging Richard, add more, more prints, the better. And so, but it was a lot of just the physical limitations of the page count we had and where the prints fell and everything else. Made a lot, it forced us into several decisions.
The page count actually grew at one point because of what we wanted in the book. And so I emailed Dana and says, do you have a couple more poems or something else? And we're trying to work through it. So we got some more in. One poem that he said at one point, let's cut that. I said, no, I really like that one. So we left that one in, but it is playing with page count and what you have to work with.
And what drives the limit on the page counter?
Cost. That was
Well,
me.
the number of signatures, the amount of paper we had, and how much we could get out of that.
In my mind, the book was a lyrical book, not a narrative book. And so that it had to have these lyrical suites of poetry and images that work together. And that was a balancing act. And that's one of the reasons I love the fold outs. I think it's a lyrical moment when you unfold it. I mean, maybe that's being terribly precious, but this is a very precious book. And so I think that just the exquisite lyricality that we were trying to bring to it, at some points that you can't sustain that, you don't want 500 pages of that, which I was perfectly able to provide.
Before we take the next question, I just want to say we have Richard very graciously made a keepsake for tonight's event that each of you should have. It's letter prints printed and signed. So please make sure you get one. And also wanted to thank Kevin Kosick, who had to put up with us for 3 years. He was in charge of all the production and getting it made and helping find binders and getting it all put together and paid for, I think.
With the small distraction of having to move the book club's headquarters.
Yes.
Do you want to take one more question?
Oh, yeah.
Before we wrap up?
But obviously each have your own private sense of expressed through your own two various art forms of what California is. And I was wondering if there were one sort of thematic, emotional area of overlap that where you see the way your two art forms interacted in this book. What would that be? How did your individual senses of California sort of coalesce in this book, do you think?
I'll give you a subjective answer. I mean, you could do 1 million books on California because there's 40 million stories. There's incredible richness of imagery and history here. But if you're doing a lyrical book, to a certain degree, you're portraying a kind of emotions and the subjectivity. And what I loved about the first prints I saw of Richard, and it was true of everyone that he gave subsequently. There is a combination in his work, and I believe in my poetry too, of solitude and beauty. A kind of moment of perception caught in solitude. And I think that you could see a variation of that in each image, in each poem. And I think it makes the book, it gives the book a particular kind of beauty, I believe. That isn't perhaps more private than public.
None of the work that I did for this or do in general is specifically for something. I'm not trying to read a poem and say, oh, what would go well with this at all. It's my response to the environment, nature, where I've traveled, and what I respond to when I do things. I think that underlying sensibility that we share comes through, but it doesn't come through by planning it or anything else. I think it's kind of inherent.
The book's a conversation.
Yeah.
Between two different senses.
Okay, I guess we're gonna end for this evening. Thank you, guys, for the great book and for spending time with us this evening.
I want to thank Greg Chrysalis for coming up with this idea.
To call you guys, it was just, I know there was something there and I'm glad it worked out.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you guys.
You're already applauding, but one more time, let's give a big round of applause. Thanks. And thanks to you for attending this book club program. We do have a program next Monday, in person and virtual, Monday, November 18th at 6 o'clock. It's called Riding Like the Wind, The Life of Sonora Bab. You can go by. I'm going to tell people how they can get this keepsake that Greg is passing out if you're here. And if you've ordered the book or would like to buy the book, you can meet me over here in my office to pick up your book. And with that, I'm going to say good night and thank you, everyone.